Alright, and here we are, folks, at the very end of it all. So, new essential question here, still talking about sectionalism, but it's going to change a little bit. We're going to stop dealing with westward migration, and we're going to look at how it is this relationship between North and South became so strained that it got to a point to where there was no more compromise. There was no more options for the North and the South to come together and fix these problems. So the question is, how did the relationship between the North and South become irreconcilable from 1856 to 1860? So irreconcilable meaning you can't fix it. There's no more fixing it. Everything that's been done is done, and there's no more going forward. So, the vocab terms from the previous videos are right there as well for you to look at. So this is information that was covered in the previous videos if you want to look over those. Again, those videos have been uploaded and you can access those whenever you want to. And the new vocab terms. The Republican Party, which we've addressed a little bit already, but I just want to go a little bit more in depth with you on the Republican Party and what that all means and explain that just a little bit more. The Dred Scott case, which the case name Dred Scott v. Sanford. The Lincoln-Douglas debates, John Brown and his raid on what's called Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and the election of 1860. So these are the vocab terms we'll cover in this particular video. So the election of 1856 was the first time in which political parties represented regions of the country, not the nation. So if you're Southern, I told you this already in the previous video, you're voting Democrat. That's just the way that it is. If you're Southern, you're voting Democrat. If you're Republican, if you're Northern, you're voting Republican. That is how the nation has been split. It's no longer just along party or legislation lines. It's along regional lines. It's North versus South very much at this point in the country. It's North versus South in politics. It's North versus South in the economy. And there's really no other political party that competes with these two main parties. You still have the Whigs and the Know-Nothings around a little bit in small margins, but they just can't compete with these two huge political parties. And surprising that the Republican Party is so massive at this point in time because it is relatively new. Slavery is, of course, the most important issue, the biggest talking point at this point in time. It is all that really concerns the American people and the American government. Slavery, what to do with it? Should it exist? Should it not? Can we abolish it? Is that a thing that we're allowed to do? The Southerners say no. Abolitionist Northerners say it doesn't matter. It's just something that we have to do. Even though the Republicans lost in 1856, though, they realize that after 1856, they will gain a majority in the Electoral College. They will gain a majority thanks to the number of House representatives they have and senators. They can win an election without any of the South. They don't need any Southern states to assist them in their voting. And the reason for that is because of the House of Representatives. Yes, the states may be evenly balanced here, but what they're not evenly balanced in is the House of Representatives. And of course we know the North is much more populous. There's many more people living within the northern states. And because of that, the North will gain a majority in the House of Representatives, thereby giving them the ability to gain a majority in the Electoral College. So they can win an election without any assistance from the South whatsoever. They can gain that majority. However, diverging away from that, we are going to look at the Dred Scott case. So the Dred Scott case, why is this significant? Why is this important? Why do we have to talk about it? Well, first off, who is Dred Scott? Well, in 1857, Dred Scott was a slave. He was owned by a doctor. And that doctor ended up going from Missouri, where slavery is perfectly legal. It is a slave state, to Wisconsin. And he brought Dred Scott with him. Wisconsin, of course, being right here, coming from Missouri, going to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a free state. And so Dred Scott figured, well, since I am in a free state where slavery is not legal, I am not a slave here. He can't own me as a slave in this state because it's illegal. And so Dred Scott actually ends up suing for his freedom. And it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, all the way through the circuit court systems and the district courts and all that. And it goes up to the Supreme Court. And it leads to two main questions in the Supreme Court. This is what they seek to answer. So first off, does Congress have the power to decide on slavery in the territories? Is it actually constitutional for Congress to outlaw slavery in certain regions? And also, is the Missouri Compromise constitutional? Granted, it's been repealed at this point, but they can look at old legislation and go, you know what, that was not constitutional. So looking at that, in the Dred Scott case, what does the Supreme Court end up ruling? First off, Dred Scott had no right to sue because Dred Scott was not a citizen of the United States. He was property, and since he was not a citizen, he could not use the federal court system at all. Dred Scott could not use it at all. He was considered property. Congress did not have the power to stop slavery in Western territories, so the Missouri Compromise was also considered unconstitutional. And Northern abolitionists, I have such trouble with that word, were of course very upset and very furious about this. The court's reasoning behind this is that Dred Scott was considered property. And according to the Bill of Rights, you could not be deprived of your property. You owned that stuff. That was yours, and it cannot be taken away except through due process of law. So, for instance, to compare it to the modern day, it's like if I lived in South Carolina and I drove my car to Pennsylvania and then I was told, well, unfortunately, you can't own that particular car in this state. Therefore, that car is no longer yours and it's taken away from me. They have taken my property. The comparison is uncanny. So Dred Scott considered property no matter where he is in the United States, and the government cannot deprive his owner of that property regardless of where he is. And as I said already, Northern abolitionists were extremely upset with this ruling. And so this actually becomes a hotly debated topic within American politics, and it's actually something that Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas discuss at length. So Stephen Douglas and Abraham Lincoln, Stephen Douglas being the Democrat and Abraham Lincoln, are both running for Senate. They are in Illinois, which is right here. And so they're both running for Senate seats. Abraham Lincoln is a relatively young, new politician, new to the scene. Stephen Douglas, however, is this big boss within the political scene. People know who Stephen Douglas is. They know his name. He's the guy that drafted the Kansas and Nebraska Act. Stephen Douglas is the hot politician, and Abraham Lincoln is just this new novice on the scene, having never held political office before. And so Lincoln does not look like the favorite. It looks like Stephen Douglas is very easily going to defeat Abraham Lincoln. However, Lincoln is going to be pretty popular during these debates, and he does speak out against slavery, but he does not use an abolitionist argument. Abolitionism, though it has gained a lot of popularity, is not how a majority of America feels. The majority of Northern Americans are not abolitionists. However, he does use the free soil argument, something that his political party en masse supports. He wants to stop slavery where it's at. He doesn't want slavery to spread. And Stephen Douglas, being a Democrat, being someone of a Southern mentality, wants slavery to spread. He believes that slavery is entitled to spread wherever it wants within the United States. Southerners can take it wherever they feel they want. So Lincoln does actually lose this Senate election, though. Though he was popular, he does lose this election. But his argument against slavery, like once again, the free soil argument, not an abolitionist one. Lincoln was not an abolitionist. His argument is going to make him a very popular figure. It's going to kind of put him right in the political eye. People are going to know Abraham Lincoln by name. They're going to become really enthralled with this character. And just a nice little quote from Lincoln: "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free." Essentially saying that the nation is tearing itself apart, and eventually it will fall to pieces because of this slave and free argument. So, going from Lincoln and moving on to another topic, in 1859 we have this man John Brown, a guy who was forged in the fires of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, all the violence that resulted from that known as Bleeding Kansas. So John Brown was very much a part of the violence that was occurring in Kansas during that time period. And once that all died down, John Brown ended up moving back home to Virginia, where he was from. And John Brown was a very, very, very convinced abolitionist. And so what he ends up doing is trying to coordinate a slave rebellion within Virginia. He wants a massive amount of slaves to attack a federal arsenal, a federal building where weapons are stored. Have slaves attack that, take it over, and arm themselves, and essentially create another rebellion similar to Nat Turner's, but in this case, John Brown, of course, wanted to be successful and essentially spark the Civil War before it even happens. People know it's something that's kind of on the horizon, and John Brown just wants to go ahead and light that powder keg that's been building up over the years. However, John Brown is not going to be successful. He ends up attacking Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Him and his sons, very few people end up showing up to support him. And actually, Robert E. Lee and his Marines show up to Harper's Ferry and stop John Brown. They kill a few of his sons. John Brown is injured in the ensuing firefight, and he is arrested and executed on charges of treason. However, John Brown, in most northern abolitionist eyes, is not seen as the terrorist that he actually is, but instead see him as a martyr, someone that died for the abolitionist cause, someone that died to free black slaves within America. So John Brown is seen in two different lights, this wonderful martyr in the North and this terrorist within the South. So eventually the election of 1860 rolls around, and it is the final straw for the South. It is it. They are done once this election is finalized. So the Republicans nominate this novice, Abraham Lincoln, who argues for the free soil argument, stopping the expansion of slavery into the West, not getting rid of it. I don't want you to confuse the two. And also, he wishes to increase the power of the national government, the southern states being, of course, for states' rights, something that they've been for a long time. I mean, look back at John C. Calhoun and nullification. That is a prime example of wishing for states' rights, states to be able to enforce their power and being able to nullify federal law. Democrats in the North and South were split over the issue of slavery. They didn't really know what to do with it, so they were imbalanced. So because of that, there wasn't a huge Democratic push for a single candidate. Northern Democrats nominate Stephen Douglas, who argues for popular sovereignty. Meanwhile, Southern Democrats nominate this guy, John Breckinridge, who argued for states' rights and the protection of slavery. So the Democrats are split. So they're actually destined to lose this. And as you can see from the results down here, if I get rid of this here, as you can see from the results, Lincoln actually wins a good amount of the popular vote and also wins enough of the electoral vote that he does win the election of 1860. So Lincoln wins the election without a single Southern vote. No Southern electorates voted for Lincoln. Southerners assumed slavery would soon be abolished and began to discuss the possibility of seceding from the United States. They think that Lincoln is going to get rid of slavery. They think it's going to go away. It's not a matter of Lincoln won't let it spread. It's a matter of Lincoln and his Republican Party are going to completely get rid of the institution of slavery, the lifeblood of the South. And so in December 1860, South Carolina will be the first to secede from the Union. If you could have called it without knowing it, you probably would have called South Carolina as being the ones that would leave, since they wanted to earlier anyway. So in 1861, more southern states are going to follow suit. It's the deep South that is going to secede first, followed by the upper South. States like North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia are going to follow suit there soon after. But that is the election of 1860, which causes the secession of the United States. So Abraham Lincoln gets elected, and essentially the country splits in two. So there you have it, folks. Everything that leads up to the Civil War. And the next video that we will be watching will be the events of the Civil War itself.